Good morning. My name is Rabbi Alan Katz, and what's that? Of the many rabbis' cats. So I will answer question number one. No, Jan is not in town, and she's not in New Hampshire. She was in New Hampshire on Friday and Saturday morning, and then she drove to Providence, Rhode Island, where she's teaching this morning with another Rabbi Katz, because the rabbi who invited the other Rabbi Katz was a classmate of Jan's, and thought it would really be cool to have a mother and son teach up in Prov together, the rabbinic. And of course, I wasn't invited. I was going to go anyway, but yes, I forget it. This is ridiculous. Anyway, so then I realized I was going to go up, and then I saw, I have this class to teach, and all these wonderful people are coming, and I wouldn't want to disappoint them, so I'm leaving now. So, okay, so hi, Joyce, how's breakfast? Anyway, so this is not a travelogue. This is not politics, but you can ask me anything you want, because I've never held back my politics. And if I was in another congregation, I would have been thrown out. And for those of you who should be thrown out, that's your problem. But this is my journey. I didn't want to give this talk, so I didn't know what to do. I actually wanted to talk when Rabbi Zohar contacted me about journeys. He said something about journeys, and I said, oh yeah, I went to this great trip in the spring. I went to Normandy to the beaches, the Band of Brothers, followed their route, and I have a whole slide presentation because I've delivered it once. So that's what I want to talk about. And then I see on the thing it says Journey to Israel. So we didn't go to Israel that summer, although one of the members there, very supportive of Israel, said, Rabbi, he's from South Carolina, Rabbi, if they're out to get you this year, you can have one of my 1,000 guns. I have guns in my 3 houses, and you can borrow them or have them if you need them. And I said, Jerry, I don't use a gun. And then he said, well, then I got your back. Don't worry, Rabbi. And then he turned to my friend from Arizona. He said, you know who I really love? I love that Carrie Lake. And my friend's face dropped. And he said, you see, we could be friends without agreeing. So that's an important lesson I learned from Jerry. Anyway, what is my journey in Israel, and how did it start? Anybody want to get in? It says the person's in, but I don't see any admit. Okay. Anyway, so this is all fate. I had no choice. I had to connect to Israel. Some of you know my birth. You were there in the labor room, right? I was born on May 15, 1948. My mother was so excited she gave birth because the day before, Ben Gurion declared that the state of Israel was coming into existence. However, and this is my claim, the British didn't leave till the 15th. Therefore, even if you declare the state and the British haven't left, you're really on the day the state was born. And so nobody else agrees with me, but that's my theory. So that's number one. Number two, how many of you have Hebrew names? Okay, put your hands down. I don't care what they are. Vicky told me last night I'm unapologetic, right, Vicky? Where are you? So you walk in. Okay, and you know that. So my Hebrew name given to me, you admitting somebody? There's no admit.
You can you be you.
I be me. Okay, you can sit here and do that. Oh, I'm supposed to sit in front of it. Anyway, so they gave me the name after some relative, and they decided to add something. So I'm Avraham, Yaakov, Yisrael. Avraham, our ancestor who was told by God, go to that place. What place? Yaakov. And this week's Torah portion, Jacob going out and coming back, and then Jacob's name is changed to Israel. And my mother and father thought, hey, that's a good idea. He was born this day, give him the name Israel. And so I went to Hebrew school, and they said, what's your Hebrew name? I said, well, can I use my third Hebrew name? And it was Israel. So I always became Israel. And so, again, that connection just kept going. And, all through Hebrew school, I had connections with rabbis. Jackie Mason's brother was one of my teachers. I don't know if I've told that story much. And his name Mesa, Rabbi Mesa. And Rabbi Mesa used to say to me whenever I came back to visit, he used to say, so Alan, how's your jump shot? I said, you don't want to know if I'm observing anything? Now, how's your jump shot going? Anyway, so, and he wasn't being funny. He was not as funny as Jackie. So my first trip to Israel was in 1965. It was a high school trip. And I went on the Israel Summer Seminar. So after all these years in Hebrew school and Hebrew high school and youth group and learning about Israel and talking about Israel, and I learned the classic Leon Uris style, learn about Israel without any side things, and I've learned a lot more since then, thank God. So I understand it a little better, but nobody ever fully understands it. So 1965, I went on the Israel Summer Seminar. Why did I choose that trip and not USY? I didn't want to eat kosher the whole way, and I didn't want to, whatever. And but it also did 2 weeks in Europe. So I went on the Israel Summer Seminar, and the group was composed of people of different backgrounds. There were a couple of young women from Yeshiva Flatbush, one of which became my friend during the trip. And we actually dated once afterwards when I ran into her at UPenn. I was leaving school and I ran into her and she was looking good. And I said, hey, anyway, and I hadn't met Jen yet. And then, so this was a trip and there were people there who never had any Jewish education at all. So it was a real mixed group. And they told us, look, there's a couple of rules. First of all, we're sorry to say the young couple that was supposed to go with you, they got sick, so they're not coming. So the director of the, whatever the sponsoring program was, came. He was at that time, from my eyes, 97 or 98, probably not. But they couldn't keep up with us at night. But he said, here's the rule. You can't, alcohol is not to be used except for sacramental purposes. And guess what we made our religion? That was a different Israel in those times. There was a border between Israel and Jordan, the West Bank. And when we stayed in Jerusalem, we stayed in a pension, not a fancy hotel. A pension is a small little hotel in Bet HaKerem. And if you wanted to see the old city, you go up and you got to Mount Zion. Any of you have been to Mount Zion? That's outside the old city. It's where they say David hung out or something did there, and Jesus had dinner there. And so you climb up into a place and you look out and they point, and that's where the wall is, and that's where that is, and that's where that is. I'm sitting there and I says, I don't see anything. I just didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I couldn't see it. And you said, don't go too near, don't go down that street because you're near the wall, and they could shoot. So it was a different time, and there was still, it was not quiet and peaceful all the time. In fact, our next stop was in a town called Kfar Saba. At least knows where that is. Anybody else? And Kfar Saba had a big teacher seminar, and they house. You don't know where Kfar Saba is? What? You were supposed to shake your head. Okay. So Kfar Saba sat on the border with West Bank, Jordan. Again, don't go too near there. Don't go there. You could be shot. Okay, didn't want to be shot, so I didn't go there. We went up north. We stayed at Kibbutz Ayelet HaShachar, where a couple of you stayed there with me. On the first couple of trips, that's the hotel, Kibbutz Hotel, we used to say it. It was not a fancy hotel in those days. And they showed us you get to the kibbutz, and the first thing they show you is these are the bomb shelters. In case, you hear the sirens or the alarms, these are where you run to. Anybody need to admit it? No. Okay. These are where you run to. And so, fine. It wasn't until years later when I was in university, and we'll get to that in a minute, that I looked down at Kibbutz Ayelet HaShachar from the Golan Heights. And I said to myself, you mean my mother let me stay there? If you stand on the Golan Heights in any of those bunkers, and you look down on the kibbutzim, you realize that it wouldn't take much more than a rock to hurt somebody, if you could throw it that far out. But it was frightening to think that I was under those cannons in that time. And if you haven't been in the Galilee, along the roads there, they have eucalyptus trees. They have to feed the koalas, right? No, there are no koalas, obviously. They did it for two reasons. Drain swamps, which they realized was a big mistake later on because they changed the natural habitat. And Israel is a great birding community, any of you birders. So they drained the swamps. They re-swamped some of the land and refilled it. but it also provided blockage on the road so the Syrians couldn't see what was driving by. And that's where we were. We didn't go to the Golan Heights, wasn't ours. We didn't go to the West Bank. We did go to Masada, and we went to Eilat. Eilat in that time was a small, dusty town. It is now a lovely beach resort. If you want a beach resort vacation, that's where Europeans used to often go. I don't know what they're doing now. And if you like snorkeling, great reef there. And but then it was, not much. And again, it was a different Israel, and it was my first experience. I loved it. So I decided that I would apply myself. Oh, wait, I also grew my first beard in Israel. And I came home, and my first thing my father said was, shave it off. You're not going to high school with it. He didn't have a beard at that time. He only had a mustache. I had to come back from college to see him when he grew his beard. Anyway, but shave it off. And I tried to grow it again during senior year. That was my senior year. And everybody on the group, all the other travelers with me said, keep it, keep it, keep it. And I grew another one when I had pneumonia. I had to shave it off till the end, even though I was in college. Anyway, I get to college, and I says, I really want to go to Israel again. I want to spend a junior year. Then you didn't do a semester. You did a whole year in one place. Basically, that was most of the time. And I really, first semester, I dropped out of pre-med because that wasn't fit for me. They just didn't teach the stuff the correct way. It helped me understand it, and changed majors. And I said, well, with those grades, they'll never let me go to Israel. So I found something, psychology, which seemed to fit my personality. I'm a real psycho. And I did raise my grades and went to Israel. And I went on the Hebrew University one-year program. 68. What happened in 67? 67 was the war. So there's a new Israel. And it was very exciting, not only because I met the most wonderful person on an Egged bus. Egged is one of the bus cooperative companies, going to do volunteer work at a children's hospital called Aline in a old monastery that was taken over by the hospital called San Simon in a place called Katamon. And we were standing on the bus going to Aline, and the woman who I sat next to, the young woman I sat next to on the plane said, oh, this is my roommate, Jan. Anyway, I don't know how it lasted. Anyway, so we did volunteer work at Aline. Aline is a children's hospital that does orthopedic work, most of the children, and a lot of them are rejected by their families. Okay, so this is one of the new shock. You learn shocks, you learn different things about different cultures. Many of the people in Israel, and some of them are very religious, if their child has any deformity, there is not an idea of inclusion and help them. They send them away, and this hospital takes them. So they live there permanently.
Orthodox Jews?
Some of them are Orthodox. The kids probably don't observe as much. Nobody else is trying to get in. Kids probably don't observe as much because it's not set up that way. And you're assigned as a foreign student, you're assigned a student, a young person to be friends with. That's all. Be friends, do things with them, come visit them. And Jan was assigned Chaya, and Jan went to Boston, the Hebrew college at that time was called, what was it called? Hebrew Teachers College. And she went to the Prosdor program there 5 days a week, and she really learned her Hebrew. I went to Temple Israel in White Plains Hebrew High School 3 days a week, and my Hebrew wasn't as strong as others. So I didn't speak, and they left. And so my friend was Tamar Cohen. And Tammy used to laugh at my Hebrew, and they didn't like my name. What's this Yisrael? That's an old person's name. You can't use that name. So what should I use? Well, my name is Avram Yaakov Yisrael. You can't use any of those. So any of you Avrams, any of you Yaakovs, any of you Yisraels, you can't use them with Tammy Cohen and Chaya Yeduav. You have to change it. So what are you going to change it to? Sruli. Why Sruli? Okay, so here's another story that you might not know. Do you remember when Israel was David and the Arab world was Goliath? Most of you are old enough to remember that, okay? And there used to be these cartoons of the kibbutz guy, Srulik. Srulik represented Israel. How did Srulik dress? He had a kova temple, which were those bucket hats that the kibbutzniks supposedly wore, shorts, khakis, and that was Srulik. So Srulik, now why is Srulik and Sruli? Why is that Israel? Yisrael, they take the SR, and they make it into Sruli. I chose not to use Sruli ever. I just didn't like it. Anyway, so that was the year. The other thing, in 68, I went into the old city. I went into East Jerusalem. I was friends with Arabs. I had Musa Abu Rumi. We used to meet at the cafe. He sold drugs to others, but he knew I didn't take drugs. It's very interesting. And he didn't sell them to me, but I didn't know he sold them to others. I just thought he sold Christianity. What he did was he converted, and he would link onto Christian groups and take them around to places. And he didn't say he sold it, but he became such a dear friend to Jan and I over the couple of years. And then after my next time there, I saw him. And then after that, I know he passed away. But I used to sit at the bus station in the East Jerusalem. So that's real in the heart of the Arab city, and drink coffee with him and meet other people. And the shoe shine guy knew me. And then I actually wore shoes. You didn't wear sneaks all the time. You wore shoes. And so he knew me, and Musa took me to places. So Musa lived a few minutes outside Jerusalem in a place called El Azariah. To Lazarus, it was known as Bethany. What happened to Lazarus there? Lazarus went into the grave, and before Jesus got up, Lazarus got up from the grave. And so he lived in a little one-room, that's stone and plaster room. And that was it. You walk outside to go to the restroom. There's no heating. He had a little gas heater that he would turn on. Those are very dangerous, and so glad not to have them. And we stayed there, visited him there numerous times. And one time he said, "Do you want to go to my sister's wedding?" Sure, why not? I'd love to go to an Arab wedding. So we went outside to a compound that a family owned, and we went to this wedding. Now, the wedding is not, you don't see a ceremony. What you do is you see the bride change her dress numerous times if you sit there long enough. And lovely experience, and everybody was friendly to us. Mostly there are Palestinian Arabs there, a few Israelis, including the military commander of the area. He was a welcome guest and honored, and they treated him with respect, and he treated them with respect. Gee, so like that now, isn't it? And so he's there, and the Greek Orthodox priest from the local monastery, he was there too. So it was all these people that you meet, and again, different Israel. And it was a time of upbeat. People think things were going good. There was some shooting going on, what they call beginning of the war of attrition, but you didn't necessarily go to that place. And one of the trips we took was into the Sinai, because that's when Israel had control of the Sinai. And so they took the students, and again, sometimes you were on roads, sometimes you weren't necessarily on roads. And the restroom facilities were great. Boys to the left of the bus, girls to the right of the bus. And the girls would circle around each other so they could take care of business. The boys didn't care. We stayed overnight outside the Santa Caterina Monastery. Has anybody ever been there? Yes. Oh, it's somebody's phone. Anyway, so I won't look at whoever has it, so turn it off so I don't embarrass you. Anyway, so we stayed outside, and they told us, they said, look, if you hear any shooting at night, and there's no lights there, it's pitch dark, you follow the leaders of the trip and you run to the monastery in the dark, in a desert setting. You don't know what you're going to trip over. And guess what? There was shooting. And we run to the monastery. We're holding on. This was like one of my first experiences with joy. Anyway, and I'm holding on to Jan, and we're running into the monastery. By the way, in that monastery, they have the skull room. I forget what the technical term for that room. And you see all the skulls of the past monks who have been there over the years. It's fascinating. there's unbelievable documents. It's history. Why is it there? It was there that probably Helena, Constantine's mother, made pilgrimage and just said that this is where Mount Sinai is. This is where Jesus was. She pointed out a lot of the places where that things happened, like she knew. And so they built it. And there's a mountain outside Jebel Musa. We later find out we're in that place, and they said, "Okay, you can come out. We're going back." This was a military exercise. There were really no terrorists in the area. But the commander said, "Look, we need to have an exercise tonight. That's what we're required to do. So would you like to just tell the people, or have them experience?" And of course, the lovely leaders of that group, I have no idea who they were now, and said we experienced. So that was an experience. The next morning, we get up before at night, didn't have many hours of sleep, and we go up Mount Sinai. And of course, there are Bedouins there at the bottom with, Jan said donkeys, I say camels. And for a couple of those days, was it shekels? I don't remember if it was shekels or lira. And you can pay them and you can get a ride up. Jan walked the whole way. I took a ride halfway up and then I had to stop and I had to ride. She'll never forgive me for that, but she always reminds me she walked the whole way and I didn't. Do you want to see God? I would like to see God. You want to see God? Go up to the top of Mount Sinai. Say, okay, it doesn't matter if it really is the Mount Sinai, because, and I'll talk about that on one of my other trips. Watch the sunrise from the top of Mount Sinai. Probably sunset was just as good, but then you have to go down in the dark. Probably harder. Going up is probably easier. And you feel this overcome. A sense of spirituality, if you just want to call it that, a sense of beauty, a sense of nature, a sense of world. And so maybe I experienced God up there. I don't know. By the way, that year, I did not observe Rosh Hashanah in a synagogue. I was, my Ulpan teacher said, "Does anybody here not have any family in Israel for Rosh Hashanah?" And so she said, "Would you like to stay with my aunt and uncle?" And these were secular, intellectual Jews. And so what did I do for Rosh Hashanah? The first time I read The Hobbit. They said, "Have you ever read The Hobbit?" I said, "No." They said, "Oh, why don't you try it?" And I really loved it. For Yom Kippur, I walked out of the synagogue at the university, walked out. I couldn't stand it. It was, I didn't understand. I'd never been in that kind of an Orthodox setting. It had no spirituality for me. I grew up in a conservative synagogue, so I knew a lot of the prayers, but it just didn't mean anything. And Jan and friends of hers from Boston, Louis Garber from Garber Travel, and his girlfriend at the time, Ellie Sugar, we said, we're going to leave as soon as we can, and we're going to hitchhike to Eilat because we have days off from school. So we decided to do that. So that at night, they didn't start the buses running at night. So we started a hitchhike and we got about as far as Yerucham. Anybody here been to Yerucham? Yeah, you haven't been. No, nobody's been to Yerucham except Jan and I and Ellie and Louie. And the ride let us off there. It's a small development town in the Negev, northern Negev. No industry. That's where they would dump some of the immigrants who came. And we were in Yerucham, sitting on the side of the road watching camels. They were right there eating on a couple of whatever bushes and trees nearby. And we're stuck, and nobody's coming by. And we're going to be stuck on the side of the road. Finally, an army truck came by and gave us a ride down to Mitzpeh Ramon. Now, some of you have been to Mitzpeh Ramon. Mitzpeh Ramon is a town overlooking, again, another wonderful, beautiful site in Israel, the crater, the Ramon crater. It's like, if you think you want to see what the moon is like, don't go with Elon. Go with, not Elon Ramon, but that other Elon. Go down to Mitzpeh Ramon and look out over the crater. And I've been in the crater at times. Ori took us there and we walked around. Ori is a guide that I've used a few times. Some of you know him. And so we stayed in a youth hostel there. And the youth hostel there, that area has a lot of ibis. The goats, not ibis is the bird, but ibex. Yeah, okay. And they're around just walking in and out of the town. It's developed now. One of the most beautiful hotels that exists there now, if you want to go and spend, I don't know how much a night. We don't, because we've been back, you can say small hotels and, just a beautiful site. And the next day I had buses running again at the Zunhai, and we decided to go down to Eilat. And we get down to Eilat, and Eilat is this beautiful tourist town right now. Hotels, there's with the bridges between buildings and casinos, and there was nothing. There were a couple of small hotels. If you lived in a lot, you got extra subsidies from the government. You paid less taxes because they wanted people down there. Why? It was the border of Egypt and Jordan and Israel, and Saudi Arabia was actually could be visible from there. And you went down there, and of course, we were students, so we slept on the beach. It was pretty empty when we got down there. It was in the evening. We lie down on the beach. We go to sleep, and it's empty. And then in the morning, we wake up. Thousands of Israelis are down there for their vacation in their campers and their tents and they're set up. It was just amazing. You go to sleep and there's nobody around you, and the next morning you wake up and they're all there. So that was a lot in those days. Okay, anything else about the university year? Oh, yes. How about the new thing called terrorism now, terrorism then? 2 terrorist attacks, bombings that we know of, that we experienced in a way. Luckily, we weren't near. One was in the library of the Hebrew University, where we were studying. And the other one was in the Super Sol. That was the first supermarket. And we used to go, one of us used to go on Fridays to go down there, and we'd get food. We'd come back and we'd all share food together, the group of friends. And I didn't know if Jan was shopping. It was her turn to shop. And, you freak out. You can't call her on the cell phone because there aren't. And so Super Sol had a bombing that time when we were there. Anything else about those years that were a little bit different? Or just trying to think. Oh, yeah. So my roommate was Ovid Sofer. Ovid was what's the correct term for somebody who's a little person? Small? No. What? Anyway, and he was a medical student. He was not allowed to be in the army because of his physical size. Lovely guy. And so I said, so which branch of the army are you in? And he said, what did he say? I can't remember the Hebrew, but it was the bullshit commandos. Anyway, so one time he was from Iraq. His family was from Iraq, and he invited us over for Shabbat dinner. And we get to the apartment, and his parents' apartment, and there's no dining room. There's just a little sitting room in the middle where people at night probably were sleeping because there's a lot of people in the apartments. And there's a table set out, and like a pita the size of a small table is sitting there, and we're ready to say the prayers. And I say, where's the challah? He says, you're looking at it. Challah is not twisted egg bread. Challah is bread where they take a little piece of the bread and they offer it back and they reburn it and make that's called the challah offering. It's an obligation, one of the few obligations women have. You have no other obligations. Women, you don't do anything. I'm just so disappointed with all of you. And so there was the pita was the challah, and the food was very different and tasty, and just so wonderful. Owen used to get up in the morning. He would get on his motor scooter. He had a Vespa, and he would go off to medical school. And at night he would come back late, and he studied and studied and studied. He did become a doctor. We lost touch after a while. I had a scooter. I bought a Lambretta, and I was the big shot guy because I bought a Lambretta, and I'm driving all over Israel. I wouldn't drive on a Lambretta on the roads in Israel today. And I only took one fall. Yeah, I did wear a helmet, but the helmets then, I don't know what they could have done if I had, fell on it. It was sort of like a cap, helmet, I don't know. And I took one spill in the Valley of the Cross. Is that symbolic or not? Anyway, if you come down from the Hebrew University, there's a road that goes down, and it used to be a big turn until you go up to Rehavia, to the center part of where people live. And in the middle of the curve, there was tons of debris because they were building roads, and they didn't care where they left the stuff. And I hit something, and I fell over, and it was fine. But I took that down to the Negev. I visited. My brother came in the beginning of the summer. I visited him down at his kibbutz. I went up to Haifa with a friend of mine. So you can go all over, even climb the hills of Jerusalem. I would not go on those roads with a scooter today. Maybe a motorcycle people would go, but a scooter is not the way you go. So I think that's all from that year. We're almost finished. No, we have a half hour more. Oh, yes. Last thing about Alin Hospital. So, I got more that year. We heard Ben Gurion came to talk to the students and tell us all to come and move there. We didn't. A couple did. We met Yigal Yadin, the archaeologist who did Masada. Why did we meet him? Because Jan took a course with him. See, at the university, in those days, you meet these people. Israel was small. I mean, over the years, because of some rabbinic missions, we get to meet people, but we were just college students meeting Ben Gurion, meeting Yigal Yadin. And so I took a course with a guy named Sishkin in archaeology. I took my courses in the English part of the program. Jan took hers in the Hebrew, who's smarter in the family. She took it in the Hebrew part. She didn't have to take extra Hebrew. So she was going out with Yigal Yadin on a dig, an archaeology site. And I went, got to go to an archaeology site, not Masada, but with Yigal Yadin. What else? I'm just trying to look. Oh, let's get back to Aline. So Jan went to Israel this past winter. I haven't been back. I'm sad to say we were supposed to go this summer, but all the flights were canceled. Maybe we'll get to go in February. We don't know yet. But there's very few airlines flying. But she went with a rabbinic mission, and I didn't go because I was working here. I just want to tell you people, I was doing a double bar mitzvah that weekend, and I couldn't. And I said, I can't leave these people without. And Renata said, I'll take care of it. I said, no. I was hired to do this, so couldn't go on the mission. And she has Shabbat dinner. She went to outside Jerusalem. When you used to leave Jerusalem, you'd look outside, you'd come a little out in the hills, and you'd see a giant M from Mivaseret Zion. It really was the McDonald's. But we always kid that it was Mivaseret. And in Mivaseret, they have a Reform synagogue. And she was at services there with other rabbis, and the rabbi wasn't there. Their rabbis take off like at least one Shabbat a month, and they have other people do them. And so she was invited to the person who was leading services, the home. She had a beautiful home, really beautiful home. And so people asked what you do, and she says, "Oh, I'm the CEO of Aline Hospital." And Jan says, "Oh my gosh, guess who met their husband on the way to Aline Hospital and still married to him?" And she said, "What, really, to him?" No, she didn't. She was with the director of Aline Hospital. 2 years before that, there was an article about us in their newsletter, because we contribute to Aline for many years, and because this is the couple that met there, and so contribute, have a connection. So the next time we go, God willing, we will have a VIP tour of the new facility out near the Hadassah Hospital, that general facility. And I've seen pictures of it, and it's a modern, wonderful, wonderful institution. Okay, let's go back to college. Finishing the year, before I go back, I said, well, what do I want to do in my life? I'm a junior, finishing my junior year, one more year in college. What do I want to do? I wanted to be a tour guide. Well, maybe not. And I met these two Reform rabbis. My experience with Reform Judaism before that was a couple of bar mitzvahs in the old classical Reform style in local synagogues. And, they didn't do any Hebrew hardly in those days. And I was Hebrew, and I wasn't conservative because I didn't observe kashrut and Shomer Shabbos the way they do it. I do observe Shabbat. And I met these two guys, and I said, these guys are going to be rabbis? And they were interesting, and they were fun. And I said, that's something I could think about that way. So I decided not to be a tour guide, which actually was good because I probably would have had to do something else since then. And I was able to take tours later on. So I went back and went to rabbinical school. And there were two rabbinical schools that I could go to. The Reconstructionist was just starting, didn't have as good a rabbinic program. You had to take a PhD program at one of the local universities or HUC. HUC was considered the harder one to get into, and I got into it. I didn't get into the other one. They said, you'll go into our education program. I said, no, I won't. I want to be a rabbi. But you talk about education. I said, yeah, but you can do that as a rabbi. So I went to HUC because they had a one-year program in Israel. So that was the first year of the one-year program that HUC required rabbis to go to. So that's in 1970. Since 1970, do you have to go?
For 9 weeks in the summer.
Oh boy. Sorry. Anyway, Jan did not have to go because she was exempt because she had been there many times and lived there for 2 years. And they figured, she didn't need to experience Israel as long as she could do the academics. And they didn't know what to do with us. They started a program. They didn't know what to do. They thought we would get back to HUC and they teach us all in Hebrew after we learned all the Hebrew. I was in the second highest level of the Hebrew program there because of the year in Israel before. The second and third year students who were there on, or fourth year students maybe, and some of them knew Hebrew more and some knew less. And but so in the morning, I had a few hours of Ulpan and modern Hebrew, you had Bible, you had rabbinic Hebrew, and then you had the whole afternoon off till they realized you can't just give them the whole afternoon off. So I started to get courses. I decided to take a course with the great scholar Nechama Leibowitz at the Hebrew University. She's a great biblical scholar, and she made me memorize chapter 37 of the book of Genesis and the Rashi. And Jan and I were just married before that. And I would come home to the apartment. I'll tell you about the apartment in a minute. And we would get to bed. And I would start reciting Genesis 37. Would I lie to you? Okay, so that was the apartment. We were in the best neighborhood in Jerusalem. So when we were the married couples, a few married couples, there were a few of the first year married couples and a few of the upper class married couples. So they got us all, and we had a couple of days orientation in New York City, and we went and they said, here are the list of apartments that you can rent. And I need to sit, I'm getting a little. So some of them took the apartments with an extra room. Friends took on the telephone in a certain neighborhood. Jan and I took the one that had central heating. They had not experienced the Jerusalem winter. In those years, if you didn't have central heating, you took these gas heater things, which are dangerous as thing, and you lit them to heat up the apartment. And if you survived, from the fumes or the explosion, you may have been warm or toasty at least. The only problem is our landlords, what they did is they cut off an apartment for her father. She was not a nice lady. And she put this father in this one room, no furniture. And they only turned on the heat occasionally. And the kitchen was the size of this table. But Jan was Jan. And the students from the single students stayed at a dorm not far away, and they would pass by our apartment. So we fed every student at some time during that year. She fed every student at some point during that year as they passed the apartment. A number of years ago, I asked my parents, I said, you saw that apartment, why didn't you say something? My father said, you weren't complaining. Why they could have helped us into something else. No, you weren't complaining, it was fine. The people with the phones had nobody to call, and didn't call out of the country, so they couldn't call home. The people with the bigger apartments might have been in a neighborhood that was a little further away. We were walking this, it was a great neighborhood, right near the president's house in Jerusalem. We met Golda Meir. She came to speak to the students. We probably met other people. I just couldn't remember who else we might have met that year. We again traveled around, and I got to meet my closest friend, maybe the closest. I have one, somebody else I would consider his closer friend, David Leichman, who some of you have met, and Mary Gold. But this was an Armenian man, George, the photographer. Some of you have been to George's shop. And George is an Armenian, and I get to Israel, and I look up an old Hebrew University friend who had made Aliyah with his family, Billy, and I said, Billy, I'm here. And he said, well, we're leaving in a week. The family has all left. I'm the last one to leave. We're going back to Long Island. But I'm coming to the old city. I got to introduce you to somebody. And I go down into the old city, and this is in the Christian quarter. And it's a mixed neighborhood of Christians and Muslim Arabs. And there's a photography shop. And he meets me, George. His father was working there. And George and I were friends up until his death a couple of years ago. We still see his wife, Jan, had, when she was there, she saw Hasmik. We know his kids, watched his kids grow up. They were just married a little before us. They had a little baby. George was a little older. Hasmik is a little younger than us. And we learned a little about the Armenian community. And one of the things we have learned over the years is that even though they were like the first Christian nation to adopt Christianity, they looked down by the others. And they have dwindled in number in Jerusalem because they're not, the Israeli Jews don't accept them fully, and the Arabs don't accept them fully. So they're always walking on a tightrope. And they may make statements that we don't like, but that's often to save their community. In the last few years, unfortunately, I've seen numerous pictures of the Armenian priests walking by in the old city and being spit upon or by Jews, Orthodox Jews. I haven't seen it done by the Arabs in the news I read, but that's what is it. So George Husmeek lived in the old city with his parents. Later on, his father is a fascinating story. We're not going to get to everything. Anyway, his father survived the Turkish Holocaust of the Armenian people. And I call it a Holocaust, that's what it was. A Holocaust is when you intentionally try to wipe out the entire population, different from what is going on in Israel. By the way, a side note, the opening statement of the Amnesty International report. How many of you read about the Amnesty International report this week, condemning Israel for doing ethnic cleansing, genocide? And the opening statement, on October 7th, Israel massed a huge force to go into Gaza.
No kidding me?
That was the opening statement of their thing. So if you think they have credibility, and I used to think they had some credibility here and there, that sort of gives it away. Not that Israel is doing a lot of things wrong there. I'm not saying that. But the condemnation just is ridiculous. Anyway, so now I have to refine my thoughts. So Eli, the father, walked as a young child, survived. His parents were killed, most of his family killed, and walked from that eastern end of Turkey through Syria. Was captured by people. Some of them said cannibals or something. George's brother wrote a book and forgot to mention that George was his brother in the book. They didn't get along. He did once, but George really took care of his parents. The brother lives in Toronto. And so his father made it to Israel, went to an orphanage, and they apprenticed him as a photographer. And he learned to take photographs. So if you've been to George's shop, you've seen pictures from before George was born taken by his father. His father had also collected a glass plate, negatives. And so George, his wife, and their son developed them and created a whole business. He stopped doing wedding photography. George also did, when they rebuilt or refaced the whole Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the archaeologists asked George to take a picture of every stone that went before it was taken out, when it was taken out, and the new one put in. George worked for the Hebrew University. So he was a noted photographer, but they went into this other business. They've done quite well with this photography business. So that year, Armenians. Okay, let's go. We'll skip now. My longest interlude was from that year, 71 till 81, when I went back in December, because my brother Bob had made Aliyah and was going to get married. So I guess must have met Lucy before that, because it wasn't new. So they must have been to the States before that. And my entire family went over. My parents took everybody in the family over. We had Tamar and Noam. We didn't have Ben yet. Noam had Kermit the Frog with him the whole time. He was a 3-year-old. And they all stayed in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem Plaza. That's the big tower hotel opposite the Grand Synagogue or the Chief Rabbinate. We got a room with Mrs. Broom. Mrs. Broom's daughter married the jazz musician Arnie Lawrence. Arnie Lawrence played a little with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He wrote an album when the Gates of Prayer, he was friends with Chaim Stern. When the Gates of Prayer came out and they were initiating, he wrote music, and there was a song Beloved. I don't know, we did hear many years ago, but Arnie's music didn't catch on with the whole movement. Anyway, he divorced his first wife. I did their kids' bar mitzvah, and then in Pearl River, and then he married this Israeli woman. He came to Israel and really established a big jazz community. There's a lot of jazz in Israel. He had a mother-in-law, had an apartment, and she had rooms to rent. So we stayed in the apartment, saved my father some money. And we walked down to the hotel and have breakfast with them. And one of my children, I won't mention which one because she'd be very embarrassed, yelled at. This was a hotel that was under strict ultra-Orthodox condition. If anybody tells a story, I'm not talking to you again. And yells out, "Where's the bacon?" So when I got out from under the table, we finished it. I said, "There's some bacon here." Anyway, and so that was it. What's that? Okay, so we did that. So I've done 2 weddings in Israel, Bob and Ruthie's, and I've done 3 weddings. I'm sorry, 3. I did 2 that week. We went down to the kibbutz, and Bob says, Alan, would you do me a favor? There's this couple, she teaches with me, and they're from another kibbutz nearby. He's divorced, but the rabbinate won't recognize his legal divorce from Argentinian rabbis or something. And they want to get married. They don't care if it's not recognized here. And they're going to come over someday, one of the days you're here. So I said, fine, I'd be glad to help them out. So I go out, I was jogging in those days. Those are the old days when I had these. And I would jog around the perimeter of that kibbutz, look out at Rafia, the city there, because it's the fence, Gaza Strip. That's where he lived. And jogged around, came back sweating. It's a desert, even in the winter. This was over the Christmas, New Year's vacation. I get back, I'm sweating, and there's the couple sitting outside his apartment. I said, do you mind if I put on a shirt and maybe you wash up before I do the ceremony? And so I did the ceremony. They thanked me so much. Some of you may remember that in my office, maybe in this office now, there's a copper chamsa that I have. That was from them as the gift. It's really sweet. And then a couple of years later, they write to me and say, the rabbinate finally recognized his divorce. We had a legal wedding, so we were legal in Israel, but yours was the real wedding. Rob and Ruthie's wedding, that's another story. Ruthie came from a family that came from Morocco, and a lot of the culture that they had. And but they still, it was a kibbutz. She was living on the kibbutz. Fine, I could do the wedding, no problem. One of her sisters was Orthodox, she even came. She wasn't strict Orthodox, but enough to come. It was midweek anyway. And so in the dining hall, they set up a chuppah on 4 pitchforks, right? We use hookah poles. They use pitchforks at the kibbutz. I don't know if they still do. And it was the first time I learned that in Israel, you don't face the bride and groom with your back to the people, the assembled. You face the people. And so we did it half and half. And they're very excited for 2 reasons. Number one, they're going to see a reform wedding that they figure is going to be 2 minutes. And they're going to get to eat the imported cold cuts. Salami, naknik. Anyway, so I had an issue. I was going to do a wedding, but my family didn't know Hebrew. The kibbutzniks didn't know English. I had to do everything in both languages, including my little drosh. They're getting impatient, and impatient is not standing. And Jan says, but bang on them going, naknik, naknik, naknik. Sausage, sausage, sausage. Anyway, so that was the experience of a less than spiritual wedding. Nothing I could do, but my parents were happy. My brother was married. Didn't last long. Shouldn't have lasted at all. Anyway, but so that was my second wedding. Third wedding, I'm moving many years.
Realize he was talking about his brother's wedding?
No.
That was my brother's wedding. Okay, the third wedding was for a Rochesterian, Danny Sott. Any of you know the Sotts in Brighton? Sure. Okay, so, of course you do. Yeah, you're good friends. And so Danny was Ben's really great friends, and Danny was making Aliyah. He lived in Israel, and he met Sarah, who was a dancer from Chicago. But Sarah's father was Jewish, but her mother wasn't Jewish. So she was raised Jew in a Reform congregation, but they wouldn't accept that in Israel. So even in Israel, in the Reform movement, she went for another conversion. She, again, went for a Reform conversion because of, she wasn't going to go Orthodox. And so I did this wedding of co-officiating with Gadia Sadan, who is the second rabbi at Beit Daniel, the very large synagogue, Reform synagogue in Tel Aviv. We once had their chief rabbi, Meir Azari, here, and Rabbi Zohar worked sort of for them in a center of the city, in an outreach center they had for a couple of years. Anyway, so I met with Gadia, we planned the wedding together, and it's in a hall it's New Year's Eve, and it's in Jaffa. I forgot to mention, even before New Year's Eve was hardly celebrated in those early years. Now it's more of a thing, but it wasn't. It was called, what? Sylvester. Sylvester, after Saint Sylvester, who was an anti-Semite, but they still call it Sylvester. And anyway, so in this lovely place in Jaffa, which I first couldn't find, we got to this big hall, and we go and we have this wonderful wedding. So it's set up different. There's not the procession as you usually see it in Israeli weddings. Usually in an Israeli wedding, the chuppah is set up, the bride and groom come to the chuppah with the rabbi, and everybody gathers around, and they're usually standing. There's not like rows of seats and things like that. But they wanted to do it half American, half Israeli. I mean, her family was all American. His family was one Israeli, his father, and his part of the family. And so he comes in, we're standing up there, and Danny's standing up there, and Sarah starts walking in a gold, shiny lame dress. Now, you have to understand, Sarah is a dancer and a choreographer. Really love her. She's such a nice person. And she starts walking down the aisle to some sort of Israeli nice music. All of a sudden, now there was no record player, but the needle scratches across the record. It's that sound. Remember that sound? Those of you, some of you don't know who record players are, but they're band needles. And the needle crossed the record player, and two people grab her parents by the arms and walk them up front. The music changes to Motown, and for 10 to 15 minutes, Sarah choreographed with about a dozen to 15 friends a dance. Danny didn't know it was going to happen. You can find it on YouTube, by the way. I found it the last time, and Danny's like, what's going on here? So Rabbi Sadan, she turns to me and she says, Rabbi, is this what they do in America? I said, actually, God,
What they do in America.
I've never seen this before. I've had a dog bring the rings a couple of years ago. I've had a bride drive in on a horse and carriage once up at the lake, but I've never had a choreographed dance. I've seen videos of them, but this is really choreographed. I mean, by professionals. And so she says, so what do we do? I said, Ganya, we smile and we enjoy it. Nothing else you can do. So that was wedding number 3. So those are my 3 different wedding experiences in Israel. Okay, so we've done HUC, we've done Rob's wedding year. My mother has amazing sense. We stayed at a hotel. There weren't many hotels not far from Rob because Ashkelon those years didn't have any good hotels. But in Beersheba, there was the Desert Inn, and that was supposedly the best. It was a B-grade hotel, but we'd stay there. So we get to Beersheba, we're driving, we had cars, and my mother had to go to the restroom. She has what I have now, and she had to get there fast. And she said, if you turn the corner here, I think there's an army base in the restroom right next to it. She remembered that from an earlier trip. My mother had an amazing memory. Anyway, so that was, Tel Aviv, we were at New Year's Eve, no big deal. You couldn't even find a party. Okay, next thing. I'm on page 4 of 9. Anybody who's bored can leave now. I mean, you really don't have to listen to my life. So the next time I went to Israel, I was up here already. So the first few times was, not here. And it was on an Israel bonds mission. One of the things I used to love doing, because I would get a reduced rate, and I had convention money allowance here, is go on rabbinic missions. Israel bonds. There was something called the UJA, the Rabbinic Cabinet, and the CCAR conference. And they were always well run because the tour companies wanted these rabbis to then give the business afterwards. They were subsidized, and you got to meet the most amazing, amazing people. Who were some of the amazing people I got to meet were the other rabbis. You got into a movement in those years. Unless in your town you might have had, you might associate with the Reform rabbi, and an Orthodox rabbi with Rabbi Kalimnik here in town, and a couple of others, but you really didn't get to know a lot of them. And then, you didn't cross movements as much as you might do. Now there's less movements and more crossing. And so that was really wonderful experience of getting to know the rabbis. And Rabbi Kalimnik and I really solidified our friendship during those trips. Rabbi Kalimnik was the rabbi of Bet Shalom, for those who don't know, passed away a number of years ago, Alav Shalom. And when I would say until I had associates, he was my closest rabbi friend in town all the time. And so one of the things I learned is we were on the plane, we were sitting next to each other, coming back from Israel one time, and I had bought a book in Hebrew. I used to do that and then read just 10 pages, and they're on my shelf. Anyone who wants to borrow them to finish them, the other 200 pages. And I bought a book called Haredim, about the Haredi. I was fascinated to read about it. This book was written about,
and was sitting, and he says, well, you better help translate it for me. So my modern Hebrew was a lot better than his. So a lot of Orthodox rabbis don't spend a lot of time in Israel. And even if they do, they go to yeshivas where they learn yeshivish, and they can be Talmud much better than I can. They can be Mishnah much better than I can. Torah were about even, but he couldn't read the modern Hebrew. And it was just very fascinating. And, so I would translate that. And another time we studied other things and, just varied. That year, we had great speakers. So one of the great speakers we got was General Moti Gore. Who was General Moti Gore? In 1967, he was the commander of the forces that entered Jerusalem and liberated, the wall. And so on the, people, the walkie-talkies they're using in those days, they didn't have cell phones. And he calls out and he writes, HaKotel b'yadenu. The wall is in our hands. And so I knew of him, and again, he's speaking to, we got other government officials, many of the presidents of Israel over the years. So the rabbi who introduced him said, we're in your hands now. It's a cute twist. So let's see what else. Okay, that's about enough of that. Then in 88, we went on a CCAR mission. Jan went 89 bonds, 90 bonds, 91. The UJA Rabbinic Cabinet did a mission. It was my shortest trip to Israel. 3 days. Why? 91. Anybody know what happened in 91? Gulf War. They were shooting Scuds at Israel.
Oh, yeah.
Saddam Hussein, remember him?
Yeah.
Okay, now we can put him in category with Assad, Anyway, so Saddam Hussein was shooting Scuds. And in those years, I would sign up and go. I would sign up and go. No, yes. And so as soon as I signed up and we were heading in, the war ends. So I claimed twice I did that and they ended wars. And I didn't go this time. I'm really not nice to them. But we got there, and one of the things we saw were, do you remember what defense system they used against the missiles then? What? No, not Patriots, Scud. Patriots, I'm sorry, you're right, Patriots. Scuds were being shot, Patriots being shot. Patriots were the multi-barrel, smaller barrels than the present day missiles. And they were being manned by American troops. And one of the officers in charge, because we were giving them for their defense, one of the officers was the cousin of one of our congregants. So sort of like this cool thing, and she's no longer here. She left many years ago. What's her name? Anyway, okay, Shelley was the first thing. I can't remember. She was a nurse. Good. It was Jessica. Braun. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, went to Jessica's bat mitzvah. Anyway, in Washington. Anyway, so we got to see that going on, and we got to meet that. So that was, again, another thing that you get to see. We've seen tank training exercises. So they would bring this rabbinic cabinet up to the Golan Heights, and we'd watch tanks going back and forth and shooting off into distances. And
it's all part of the same narrative.
You get to see. The other thing was that
Anything else?
the other thing was anyway, that's about it for that trip. Okay, after that Gulf War shortest trip. Then in 92, I went to the 1992 a rabbinic cabinet mission. What does 1992 celebrate? 500th anniversary of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Columbus is just a sidekick. No, he's not part of it. So this was a mission to go to Israel, learn about Sephardic Jewry, but start in Spain, go to Turkey, where a lot of the Sephardic Jews ended up. The Ottoman Empire took in Jews. The Sultan at the time said those Spanish kings are idiots. They're losing all this great talent, and brought them into Turkey. That's why there's a large Turkish Jewish community. But the funniest part of this, before we went to Israel, we went from Spain, but not directly to Turkey. We went through Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a place where Jews also went because they weren't Catholic. and some Jews, and so is a Sephardic Jewish community in Holland. I don't know what's left of any Jewish community in Holland, although Elon was going today or something. His two of the kids live. He says, as long as it's not Amsterdam, you're probably okay. And then back to Turkey, and then Israel. I don't remember if I saw, that was the time I saw Fiddler on the Roof, a Turkish youth at a JCC in Turkish and whatever else language, very little Hebrew. Anyway, so then Israel learned about Sephardic Jewry. We got, again, leading scholars. So one of the things to know about Israel is it's not Ashkenazic and Sephardic. The Jewish world is not Ashkenazic and Sephardic. Jewish world is, there's Ashkenazic, there's Sephardic, that went from Spain to Turkey, Greece, North Africa. And then there were Jews from the days of the temple who spread out in the Middle East. They were never Sephardic or Ashkenazic. We call them today Mizrachim, the Eastern Jews. So you have, that's three different cultures to begin with. The Yemenites were always separate. So if you, there's actually a small Yemenite museum in, or Yehuda maybe? Anyway, and there's a Babylonian. The Babylonian Jews are not Sephardic, Iraqi, one of the largest community. That's where the Talmud comes from. One of the longest lasting communities until recent years. And they have a museum to the Babylonian Jews. And one of the greatest Jewish cultures comes out of the Babylonian community. And so they don't like to be called Iraqi Jews all the time. They like to be called Babylonian Jews. So you got to meet them and see them in different ways. Some of us went to Italy a few years ago. There are Ashkenazim who came to Italy. There are Sephardim who came to Italy. There are Italian Jews who came during the Roman Empire days. And then in Rome, they consider themselves even different, Roman Jews. So again, we think there's just a couple of divisions. It's not like that. It's much more extensive and, again, fascinating and great because there's a lot more different kinds of food. One of the things we also learned about, which I had never experienced before when we went to Istanbul, was, this is 1992, was security. So at the Istanbul synagogue, which has been attacked a few times, you come to the door. So some of you, if you've traveled to Europe recently and gone to Jewish institutions, you come to a door, they let you in to a secure room, glass room, sometimes not in South America, it was actually giant metal doors. They close the door behind you, and then before they open the next door to let you in. And that was the first time we experienced that. The other thing I experienced for the first time in the Istanbul synagogue was a Haftorah scroll.
In Italy.
So a Haftorah scroll, you know, like a Torah scroll, but one thing. And so the weekly Haftorah are on that scroll. And so they asked one of the rabbis to chant the Haftorah. He said, sure. Some of us I can sight read Haftorah chant. I can sight read Torah chant from the book, but not from the Torah, without the notes. And they handed the Haftorah scroll. No notes, no vowels. He did a great job. I'm really proud of him. I could not have come close to that. When are we supposed to end? Now? I'm not done. I'll give you no, I'm going to stop. In case I ever do this again, we'll start, the rest of it will be my temple trips and recent times and Modim partnership. Any questions?
So much tension sometimes between a rabbi and
I
murder.
think he's loose because
Somebody's, Joyce and Bob, you didn't put silence on your computer. I hear your conversation.
sorry. We're only saying
Very
good.
nice people, but you know. Anyway, anybody have any questions about any of this?
About that.
Bye. Oh, Arlene.